Alrighty, good evening and welcome back to part 3 of tonight's From Day 1. As always, we do have Art Bell along with us with Linda Moulton Howe tonight about megastructures, Sirius, and more, originally from November 3rd, 2015. So, without further ado, let's get to the interview with Linda Moulton Howe and Art Bell.
852, and all you have to do is go to the AAVSO website and you just type in the KIC star number, and it's called Pick a Star, and then you create a chart of your own and you can contribute to the study of this.
Okay, now I want to interject something and then I want you to comment, Linda, and it is this. We talked about this with my listeners quite extensively, and I think that if they do announce or even confirm that something 1,480 light years out is the real McCoy, and we are dealing with aliens, which could be the eventual result of this story, that the world will go on, everything will be fine. However, what I did was I asked a bunch of people who called in, many of them from the South, from the Bible Belt, Linda. This is a week ago. And here was what I asked them. I said, if aliens are found, and if aliens land, and they come down the ramp, and after learning how to communicate with them, we find that either A, they don't worship a god, or B, that they just don't have the slightest idea what God is, or even the concept, how would that affect you? And these many people were in the South, I'll grant you, in the Bible Belt, but they said such a revelation to them would shatter their faith.
And I guess my comment is that I started to say believe, and I don't want to use that overworked word. I'm going to say it this way, that if my relationship from being a child to where I am now and all the things where I should have been dead and something has saved me and all kinds of things that have given me a really strong sense that I have an ally in what I call the divine field, and it is outside of entropy, it is outside the matter worlds, but it is the origin for the matter worlds, and that from my point of view, every living anything has the pura vida from the divine field, and therefore, if something is advanced enough to get to a point that it has survived tribal warfare or whatever else would be the evolutionary curves of life evolving in this universe or even other universes, that if it gets to a point where it can build huge structures to harvest energy from a star, I just have to think that they would not be just immediately violent savages wanting to eliminate us or other life. And so it may be naive, but I really do think that advanced intelligence, by the definition, is not going to destroy other life willy-nilly.
Okay, all right. Well, that's perfectly reasonable to say, Linda, and I'm sure you're correct. I would hope they would socially advance as we... Well, I don't know. As we are doing, I'm not sure we're doing it. We say we are, but I don't see proof of it yet. Maybe eventually we will. Either way, my point was, if they didn't know about God when they got here, even if we communicated with them and they didn't know about God, this would shatter the religious foundation and belief of really religious people. Now, if you're looking for reasons why it might not be announced, there's one in your lap.
Well, it's odd that anybody, whether it's from any religious box or those fundamentalists in the southeastern United States, that if they feel a closeness to a divine God and Christ, why in the world would meeting non-humans that didn't affect their relationship to the cosmos?
Well, because, Linda, to them, the word is the word. There is but one God, period.
And others not believing in that God shouldn't have any impact on them.
And yet that's what they said. I mean, this is a major...
Yeah.
It's okay. At 1,480 light years, people go, okay, But
it makes it safe.
Yes, it makes it safe.
It is a discovery at a safe distance.
There you have it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you have any guesses which way this is going to go, Linda?
Well, that is a very appropriate question. And I like Jason Wright when he said, wow, that would be cool. I guess I want it to be structure of something that is, of course, advanced, intelligent, compassionate, benign, and that we will be introduced to other life in the universe in the best, most positive way that there can possibly be, and that is a sort of fantasy answer. The other part that is being more realistic is that we may go on for a year or so with all of these efforts to try to analyze the light signatures and trying to determine if there's any dust and all of that. And it may take much longer than we think that we're going to get an answer. And in the meantime, what I've found frustrating, like in series, it's sort of parallel. That we get something that is discovery. Last time I was on with you, Midnight into the Desert, we were talking about series. And this is, to me, sort of parallel of what kind of a world are we in now when science seems to become so political so rapidly and gets then manipulated, and that comes down to this.
Well, we're in the world of our own making.
Well, the fact that science is becoming so political is disturbing, and this is worth reporting tonight. We left off, you and I, about the excitement of the discoveries on Pluto and Ceres, and that in Ceres were the intriguing bright spots in that crater called Okator.
Yes, ma'am.
And it's a crater, it's about 60 miles across, 2 miles deep, and in this was I think it's fair to say, a kind of pattern of very bright lights that seem to be self-glowing even in the images when the dawn was going, the planet or the planetoid was rotating, and you could still see some of the light at the horizon edges. And Christopher Russell, PhD, at UCLA. He's been Don's mission principal investigator right from the beginning. He's a very, very respected planetary geophysicist. Well, he said that, to me, back in what would have been the July going into August period, he said, quote, we're getting data from the VIR spectrometer, and I got a report back yesterday, and this was the end of August, that all of the data over the bright spot was obtained, but the white substance is still unidentified, close quote. I have this on the recording. So he had told me that when we got down to 930 miles above the surface, that should be happening in the 1st of August, and to call him and we would do another interview.
Right.
And he was delightful to talk with, and he and I share this love of astronomy and planets, and we really bonded, and he said, I would really like to do another interview with you, and I called him. And he said on the phone, Linda, we've run into a problem. Mm-hmm. He said, we have lovely, that was his word, we have lovely new photographs from this new orbit that has settled into about the 930 miles above Ceres. But he said one of our scientists has submitted a paper to Nature. Nature is UK, remember?
Sure.
Not US, it's right. UK.
Right.
It's American tax dollars that are paid for this Dawn mission. But it is the UK Nature that has now embargoed all of the new photos from the 915 to 930 miles. And
Embargo.
this is an interview that I did with Professor Christopher Russell, and everybody listening can go to my September 3rd Earth Files and read Part 1, where are new images of the bright spots on Ceres from the lower 915-mile orbit? And I say the NASA Dawn spacecraft is in its new lower mapping orbit of 915 miles above the dwarf planet's surface, but an embargo by the journal Nature is preventing the release of new images taken closer to the October.
Wait a minute, Linda, wait a minute.
Yeah.
How can a British publication, how can they embargo pictures that the American taxpayers have paid for?
That's my question. It was my question to Professor Russell. He seemed himself to be frustrated, and here is the kicker. This was 2 full months ago, because you and I are talking now on November 3rd. I did this Earth Files report on that last discussion with Professor Russell about the fact that he couldn't release photos because they were embargoed on September 3rd, 2015. He said to me when we left off the phone discussion about the new photos and some of the things that they were seeing in the new photos which he couldn't release, he said, look, I agree with you. I'm going to go to Nature and to the scientists and see if we can't work out some sort of a compromise here, because you're right, Linda. This is an American project, and we should be able to, all of us, share in these photos. And he said those words. And the next day... Wait.
I'm sorry, Linda. I've got a question. Who the hell made a deal with them in the first place that allows them, under any condition, to embargo?
That's what I'd like to know. It is, and he didn't have an answer beyond the fact that the paper had been submitted to Nature, which automatically embargoed the release of the photos, and the entire paper was about what the bright spots in the Akator crater could be.
So what idiot signed that on our behalf?
I don't know. And it's now 2 full months later, and all you have to do is type in a URL, news about the Akator crater bright spots, and there's nothing. There's been no image releases. And this is very germane to the question you asked about Tabby Star 1,480 light years away.
Oh.
What if they decide, and when I'm talking about the powers that be that are trying to guide, restrict, and manipulate how this planet learns that we're not alone in the universe, what if the same thing, embargoes, are put on new information that SETI and others might learn, and that they know for a fact that it were, let's say that they decide that it is intelligence? What if embargoes are put on it and they cover it up for X amount more time because they're saying that they need scientists to be able to publish? Do you see where I'm leading?
Yes, of course.
We should be getting this news now, and not waiting for alleged waiting for Godot publications. And the very fact that this has happened on Ceres, a dwarf planet out between Jupiter and Mars, when it got to 915, and we are now November 3rd, we're supposed to be only 4 weeks away from the spacecraft getting down to 235 miles above the surface. And Professor Russell himself told me, he said, we should be able to identify everything. But then this was another one of the surprises. He said, one of the problems we have is with our camera. The pixels will only go down to something like, I'm trying to remember now if it was 3,100 feet or 3,100 miles. It was like pixelation that was not fine and resolution enough. If these were, like if there were tiny buildings, we might not be able to see them from 235 miles. And he was saying it was because they didn't have enough money when they put the Dawn spacecraft together to have a good camera with high resolution. And you just go, what? how could we do this and go out all that way? And the one thing that we need more than anything else is clear, high-resolution pictures of the surfaces of these things. Is it possible that that is true? Or is that a kind of another deflection that, depending upon what they find, they can always say, well, the resolution isn't high enough to see if there are buildings?
Or, Linda, is it possible that the higher resolution photographs simply, for reasons that we can only imagine, are being withheld from us?
Well, it's a very good question. And right now, anybody can do this themselves. Google for new images of series from the 915, and it's settling down. It's going to be going to 235 in December, which is not very long. And if they haven't released photos since we were at 1270, remember?
Yes.
And we should have all of the close-ups available to the whole world in December, and we haven't even gotten them from 915. And then we're talking about the bright spots in the Akator crater. What about that amazing 4-mile-high mountain that looks like it's made out of glass with all those parallel lines going down it? And what's sitting right next to that 4-mile-high mountain is that big crater right next to it. And even Professor Russell said that when he first saw it, he wondered if there was some relationship between the mountain and that crater. Well, maybe the 915 or the 235 orbit might tell us more. And right now, we don't have anything that is closer than the last more distant mapping orbit. So you see, this is very peculiar. This is very peculiar because even if they were tying up with an embargo on the Akator crater with the strange bright spots, why wouldn't we have all kinds of images on this 4-mile-high mountain in that crater?
Linda, do you think it has to do with money? In other words, are they somehow giving this information to nature or whoever they're giving it to because a financial deal of some sort has been cut? Now, it doesn't make any sense that such thing would have been done, but you know what they say, always follow the money.
Well, here's a direct quote from Professor Russell to my question about how it is possible that the UK journal could do this. And he said, we were just ready to submit with a press release. This is him talking to me back at the end of August, going in the first week of September. We were just ready to submit with a press release written, and the new images of the bright spots were in our press release. And then we realized that one of the investigators had sent in a paper to the publication Nature, which required an embargo for us not to talk before publication. And the paper is about the bright spots, making an interpretation of what the bright spots are. And I said, what is the embargo date? And he said, well, you know, the trouble with getting involved with these journals, the paper has been sent out for review, but it has not been accepted. So we're in this never land of not knowing. But the new photos are lovely, quote, unquote.
Oh, yeah, thanks for that. Thanks for that. So nice.
This is very strange.
Well, again, who is the idiot who signed such a thing? I mean, was that just an error, or is there money involved?
Well, you know, another interesting thing that he told me from the photos that he said that he had right there on his desk, he said, it looks like there's a fairly thick dusting of white powder. It covers the area nicely and smoothly, and it goes up and down over the terrain. So something has been puffing out white powder in the region, probably for some time, and that this is probably a fairly thick layer of this white powder covering the region that we call the bright spot.
Can he say all that without violating whatever stupid agreement there is?
I don't know, but see, what is so interesting is that I read to you that quote, that we're now getting data back from the VIR spectrometer, And I got the report back yesterday that all of the data over the bright spot was obtained, but the white substance is still unidentified, close quote. So if they've got close-up spectroscopy at that 915 level, and they still can't identify what this white stuff is, that's a fantastic mystery.
Sure. Of course it is. And the British have it locked up.
That's what's so strange, weird, and unfair. And that's why I raised this, because what if we are now at a time when we're going to have one unbelievable astronomical discovery after another, but all of the release to the public can be controlled by alleged embargoes by journals?
You know, what you have said is so outlandish that I actually don't know how to react, except with anger.
Well, it is frustrating. I must say, I was looking forward that we were all having this wonderful effort in the dawn. It felt like, didn't it, in the beginning, oh my God, look at what we're discovering, and it's all together, and everybody in the world is seeing everything at the same time, and the astronomers are baffled, and oh, this is so exciting. And then suddenly it becomes just as political as everything else.
Okay, so, you know, maybe we ought to urge people to write to their representative and raise holy hell. And somebody ought to be sitting in front of a congressional committee going, I can't recall, or something. I mean, we've got to get somebody to answer for this.
Yeah, saying, why don't we have the series photos in front of us now?
And why is a British publication able to embargo very important information that the U.S. taxpayers paid to get?
Yeah, that's it. That's the bottom line.
Damn.
So anybody listening, if you can get in touch with, I don't exactly know who to reach out to, because what is the leverage point from Americans to nature if they can, in fact, embargo material that is related to American a space mission?
Well, and a lot of people in America subscribe to nature. There is that.
Well, ask.
You know, what I mean is if people threaten not to buy Nature anymore, the publication, then they might think that over.
Well, it is such a brilliant journal. It really is. But it is showing a face here of manipulation and control of information germane to us that I didn't think was possible.
I would not have said this would be possible either. You know, in the past, there have been sort of deals like this that I've heard of. You know, people who process some of the early images of Mars. I remember some kind of strange stuff about that, too, even the moon. And, they were held back for certain reasons and deals that were made. But now with a British publication, my goodness.
Exactly. So it is, and this, I hope people listening will be even more curious, perhaps write even more letters to NASA and to Nature about, are we going to be able to see all of the photographs at the next low orbit at 235 miles above Ceres? And if not, why not? Because the last words we had from scientists was they would get into that orbit and that this spacecraft would stay in that orbit and that they would be getting back information for as long as those little jets would keep going with their ionization. And right now, we've had basically a block from September through October on the 915 images. So what is going to happen in December?
I don't know. Maybe NASA's getting so starved for funding, Linda, that they're beginning to, sell to the highest bidder.
Wow.
I'm not really serious about that. I'm sure that will not be taken well in NASA. But, I mean, I do know these deals are made, but for it to be made with a foreign journal, even the prestigious Nature, and it is prestigious, and then having embargoes slammed on. In this day and age.
It's not fair. It's just not fair. And it's time that we all can participate with complete freedom of information about things in our own solar system.
Hear, hear. All right. So we've done pretty well in covering Tabby so far. And
our solar system, and we could come back to Earth to talk about what's happening in the North Atlantic.
I would like to do that. Are we talking? Well, you know what I want to talk about? I want to talk about this cold blob, and I guess that's in the Atlantic, right?
Yeah, and listen, do you remember? It goes back to December 2002, and that's when I did my very first Dreamland Coast with you about what then we were calling it the North Atlantic Oscillation, and I was doing an Earth Files report and a Coast and a Dreamland with you because there was data then that was suggesting that big conveyor belt that takes the warm Gulf Mexico water northward into the North Atlantic, where it has to be salty for the cold water to sink. It's the sinking of the salt density that keeps that big conveyor belt going and drawing that warm water. And back in 2002 were the first rumblings that there was data beginning to say that it was slowing, and that's where you and I were on the air talking about it then. And in fact, it was the journal Science had published findings that there were, I think it was 6 world biggest freshwater rivers in Eurasia, and they were dumping all of this fresh water into the Arctic Ocean because this was the beginning of all the permafrost melting of fresh water, and that was diluting the salt.
All right, hold it right there, Linda. And the possibilities then are terrible. You begin to disrupt those currents, and Europe could freeze up. Somebody wrote a book about that. It came the day after tomorrow, right? I hear the drums echoing tonight.
We return once their musical interlude is complete with Art Bell and Linda Moulton Howe. So now again we return to Midnight in the Desert.
Once with Art Bell, please coordinate your phalanges and call 1-952-225-5278. That's 1-952. Call Art.
Well, okay. Linda Moulton Howe is my guest, and we're about to talk about the blob. Now, that makes a good headline, right? The blob. Sounds like a science fiction movie from, I don't know, maybe the 50s. The blob. This blob isn't, actually it's a lot scarier than that old blob movie. So here's the deal. The blob is a very disturbing mass of very cold water. And one thing, let me read this. Americans are hot, but not too bothered by global warming. Most Americans know our climate is changing, but they say, well, they're just not worried about it. Now, this is according not just to my observation, but a poll by the Associated Press and the NORC Center for Public Affairs Research. So, that brought on my comment at the beginning of the show that until the water is lapping at the ankles of Americans, they're not going to do a damn thing about what's going on with the climate. They're just not worried about it. That's all there is to it. It's not going to be discussed. It's not up for discussion. They're not going to worry about it. Yeah, it's changing. They don't care. How about that, Linda?
Well, I'll tell you, in October of 2015, if there were 6 big rivers, when you and I talked about this back in 2002, that were dumping fresh water into the North Atlantic, and they were getting slower conveyor belt, then right now, even more fresh water is melting off of Greenland into the North Atlantic. And this clearly, I mean, there's no question that all of the ice melt coming off of Greenland is going to dilute the salt density in that water. The question is, to what extent and how long will it take to have impact? And this is when just 2 weeks ago, I talked with Thomas Delworth, PhD. He's a research scientist with NOAA's Geophysical Fluid Dynamics Lab, and he's professor of atmospheric and ocean sciences program at Princeton University in Princeton, New Jersey. And well-respected, tremendous substance in his knowledge about this, what is called, the scientists today, instead of North Atlantic Oscillation, they refer to this as the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, or AMOC. AMOC is the acronym. And
as in running amok, but not quite.
Right. Absolutely. And what makes this extremely interesting and unusual and disturbing is that for 2 years and 2 years only, they started measuring really abnormally cold. We're not talking about just a little bit cold. We're talking about really abnormal, off the charts. They're calling them record-breaking cold temperatures in the North Atlantic, and it keeps growing. It is growing and growing, and that's what they're referring to as this abnormally cold blob. But when I went to Professor Delworth to ask him about it, he said it is absolutely true that the amount of melting is increasing over Greenland, and that somehow much of that could be leading to this abnormal cooling in the Atlantic. But here's the problem. They can't get data that will explain to them why there is a 2-year-long growing, expanding, gigantic amount of this cold water, when it does not appear to be that the Greenland, and this is now something, imagine everybody who is listening, put your mind down to Florida, off the coast there and the Gulf, and know that we get up into the high 80s in the summer. That gets to be really hot water.
Sure.
And it is going in gigantic currents up into that North Atlantic, and the expectation would be that there is so much hot water and it is such volume, it would have an impact on the North Atlantic, and that this gigantic, expanding, growing area would not be able to keep doing this without having some tempering from this hot water. So now, the very fact that it has expanded for 2 years is a mystery, but it has led to other research having to do with winds. And the more I have been interviewing scientists in the last 2 or 3 years, the more I'm beginning to understand that the relationship between what is happening with bands of winds as the planet is warming up is becoming a really serious consideration, not only in the northern hemisphere, but the southern hemisphere. And we'll talk about Antarctica here in a few minutes. But what he said to me, a direct quote, "We've seen in the last 2 years stronger than usual winds over the North Atlantic, over that entire region. Those could actually be cooling the ocean directly by the atmosphere. And the winds are not only increasing in intensity, they've been changing where their bands are." And that is something that is playing into scientific analysis of what has been happening in Antarctica. I saw earlier tonight on CNN and on Fox, they had running across on the bottom headline, scientists say ice buildup in Antarctica. Well, I talked about that with Professor Delworth as well, and he said that it is these bands of winds that have been moving toward the South Pole, that what they have found is that the temperatures are so cold and the winds are so strong that where ice is coming off of Antarctica and falling into the water, instead of moving north in circulation and melting as would be expected, the winds are forcing all of this breaking ice to stay around Antarctica, and the temperatures are going colder. And in fact, October 6th, a little less than a month ago, NASA reported that when Antarctica ice grew to its annual peak on October 6, 2015, this year's maximum ice fell much lower to roughly the middle of the amount that had been measured during the past 37 years of satellite observations. Not increased, it was lower. And that scientists speculate that it is possible that the spreading warm El Nino in the Pacific has dampened Antarctic ice buildup, but that the hemispheric winds are so much stronger than they used to be because of a warming atmosphere, and that one consequence is that sea ice that melts and breaks off of Antarctica clusters around the continent instead of floating northward and melting, which is exactly what Professor Delworth told me was his analysis, and this came out officially what I just read to you from NOAA. So we have climate warming, global climate warming. We have a North Atlantic having to do with the cold blob there, and then we have what you might call paradoxical data that there is Antarctic buildup of ice, but that it may very well be related to the winds there that are cooling everything down and keeping the ice from spreading. And it may be both in the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere that the changes in intensity and bands of winds are causing more impact than anybody had ever seen in computer models.
All right. Well, you just explained something that was very interesting, and I don't know that I got it. In other words, you're right. There is a story saying that there is now more Antarctic ice than ever before, not less. And so you're telling me, no, that's wrong. There is less. Is that correct?
Yeah, they had a measurement in October, on October 6th, and this was NASA from satellites, saying that the annual peak of Antarctic ice was much less than it had been last year or the year before. In fact, that it measured at about the middle amount of buildup that they have seen on average over the last 37 years. But bigger than that is that the paradox of hearing about more ice in Antarctica could very well be tied to these strange increasing intensities of wind bands that are moving toward the South Pole, and they're going to increase snowfall from more moisture that's being carried in warmer atmosphere, but the winds are also pushing against any ice getting north. And so you've got two things at work. You've got brute force of winds holding the ice that falls off of Greenland, and then you've got the colder temperature from the intensity of the winds creating more snowfall, all of it related to global warming.
All right, so what happens if all that ice that's being held there by the winds you're talking about suddenly somehow gets set free?
It's a good question, because if you jump back up to the North Atlantic, the more ice comes off of Greenland into the North Atlantic, it's fresh. It's
right.
Fresh water.
That's right, yes.
And it is going to dilute that salty water. And at least Professor Delworth, he's not dismissive about anything, but he says that the computer models, I said there have been some headlines that Western Europe could end up facing much colder winters.
Oh, yes.
Do you think that's possible? And he said there's very little evidence to support that. The idea that this weakening or collapsing AMOC will cause severe cold over Western Europe is just not supported by the science. He goes into the computer models, which he does a great deal of computer modeling, and they see that there definitely could be a slowing of the conveyor belt, but that it will be gradual, and that the positive upside to all of this is that if the conveyor belt were going to be allowing colder temperatures in the western Europe and along the east coast of the United States, while we know that water temperatures from the Gulf and the South are getting warmer and warmer and warmer every summer, that we might end up with one of those, by the grace of God, we've got warmer waters that are meeting with colder waters, and it's gradually slowing the conveyor belt, but nothing catastrophic, and that in fact all of this warm water would help temper what would happen to Europe if the conveyor belt gets slower. So we are on right now the most complicated planet. In every direction, there are contradictions and paradoxes because global warming is producing way more water in the atmosphere, and that water has to come out. But at the same time as warmer air gathers more water, it also denies waterfalls in lots of areas of the planet. That's why computer modeling for getting to 400 parts per million CO2 and beyond, and we hit 402, we hit 400, I think, or 402, just a year ago,
right.
And that the computer models have always shown there will be huge droughts and there will be huge flooding events because it's called adiabatic warming and cooling. When you have these...
You know what, though, Linda, I've got to go back to this because it's really important. If the American people don't care about climate change enough to do anything about it, and that is what this study says, imagine how little they care just in case any of those ocean currents are in trouble or potentially could be in trouble. The answer is -10.
Well, I'll tell you something that is already happening, and this is coming from people who communicate to me at earthfiles.com about where they are living in Florida and North Carolina and South Carolina. And these are direct letters saying that even now, when there is a full moon, they can have flooding in their sidewalks and streets, the ones that are very close to sea level. And that these are coming from people who have lived there for a very long time. They've never seen this before. And I also know from a person who does not want their name to be used or their title, they are working inside of Florida government. And they said the biggest secret is that there have been all kinds of meetings with the governor on what are they going to do because they are getting flooding. They're getting lots of flooding for all kinds of events and reasons that they didn't have before. And remember James Hansen, he got together, I think it was 16 scientists, and they released, it wasn't very long ago, and it was about the fact, in fact, I have it right here. It was NASA Goddard Institute for Space Studies is where he has been, and he now directs the program on climate science awareness and solutions at Columbia University's Earth Institute. He and 16 other prominent climate researchers collaborated on a July 2015 paper in which, this is James Hansen, with them said, quote, if the ocean continues to accumulate heat and increase melting of marine terminating ice shelves of Antarctica and Greenland, a point will be reached at which it is impossible to avoid large-scale ice sheet disintegration with sea level rise of at least several meters, close quote. And that was one of the headlines in the New York Times back in July when they released that paper. And Hansen said that he thought now conservatively that by New Year's Day 2100 that there could have been a 12-foot rise in sea level. Well, that would take out at least half of Florida. And this is not...
I would like to repeat to you, Linda, there's study after study. The American people don't care. Now, I grant you, when the seawater, or actually seawater with not as much salinity as was there previously, begins to lap at their ankles, they might care, but not until then. Guaranteed.
Well, we're in a laboratory test, Art. We're in a living laboratory test. The planet is changing, and islands are going to go under, and people are going to have to be moved, and animals are dying, and trees are dying, and that somewhere along the line, maybe there will be that real tipping point where it is rubbed so hard in our faces that people will act, or it's going to be that there will be so many catastrophes that governments can no longer pay for that it will force Earth and civilizations back to a new level of energy use, consumption, and emission.
Well, I guess if there are really big emergencies, if we get nothing but Category 5 after Category 5, and it's moving that way now, actually, Linda. We're getting an awful lot of Category 5s. You, of course, watched that massive hurricane that made itself a Category 5 virtually overnight and then dissipated just about as quick, right?
Yeah, the intensity that brought that to the 5 category, and then the release of the energy is part of what they call this hugely dynamic, where everything is going to be more dynamic. Professor Delaware said exactly the same thing when I said, what is it that you most expect will be outstanding in the rest of the 85 years of this century? And he said it will be the increasing intensity in storms, that the computer models show that the storms will become increasingly violent, but the good side is there may be fewer storms. They don't fully understand why the computer models show that, but that is what they show. Great intensity, fewer intense storms.
Interesting. All right. Well, if you were living in the Philippines, you wouldn't know that this year, that's for sure. Listen, Linda, would you be up to answering some listener questions? You've laid out an awful lot of material tonight, right?
Yeah.
All right, good. Hold it right there then. We've got a break coming up, and when we get back from it, I will lay out, well, I'll do the talk, actually. And so if you want to speak to Linda Moulton Howe about something she has said, now is the time to begin thinking about it. Boy, she has really laid out some serious material tonight. No question about that. I'm Art Bell. Midnight in the desert, scorching across the land.
All right, we've got about 10 minutes left. We're going to try to take as many of the open calls as we can before this episode concludes. We, of course, return as soon as their musical interlude is complete. So we return to Midnight in the Desert with Linda Moulton Howe and Art Bell. Megastructures, series, and a lot more.
Spans the world. To call us from outside the U.S. and Canada only, use Skype with a headset mic if on a computer and call MITD 55. That's MITD 55.
All right, so here's a talk, short version, mind you. Our public number to reach Linda, area code 952-225-5278. One more time. Area code 952-225-5278. Skype. We love Skype because it sounds so good. Now, you can download Skype to your whatever, your phone, your iPad, whatever. It's free. Skype is free. And it's pretty cool because, A, it lets you sound better, and B, you can make free calls from anywhere in the world. Absolutely free. So when you get Skype, put it on your device, become familiar with it, and then when you're a little familiar with it, you'll see a plus sign up there, and that's called Add a Contact. Push it. And then add us. In the case of North America, MITD 51. as in midnight in the desert. Case doesn't matter, just the letters, MITD51. If you're in the rest of the world, somewhere else in the world, it's MITD55. That's MITD55. That's the way to reach us, and that's the way to ask a question if you would like to. There is just one more thing I would like to ask Linda about, and that is actually two questions. One, it seems to me that there are fewer what I would call legitimate UFO sightings in fairly recent years than there have been in the last, 50 years, 45 and on. It got pretty hot, 47, whatever. Got pretty hot. A lot of sightings everywhere. Not so much in recent years, it seems to me, although I know Linda knows of one in Georgia, and if we can do a very short summary of that, I'd love it.
Well, I will try. It is one heck of a story, and from my Earth Files news point of view, I would say that there has been increasing numbers of substantive UFO experiences, encounters, people in the human abduction syndrome.
Oh, yes.
Yes, the high strangeness has increased from where I sit. And in this particular case, we're going back to June 28th, 2015, starting a little bit after sunset in the Fort Hunter area in Georgia near Savannah. A sergeant who has asked for anonymity, so I call him CJ, his wife, 2 children, a dog, and a cat, set off in a truck for a move from Fort Hunter going to Colorado Springs, Colorado, for him to do new work at Fort Carson. And their choice was to travel at night, cooler for the animals and the kids, not as many trucks and cars on the road, and so they would sleep in the day and go at night. And the plan was, with his brand new GPS, not a man unfamiliar at all with GPS. He's been in the Army for a long time. He has, part of his work is to be able to identify things that are in the sky, what type they are, engines, everything. Okay. So he's an observer. He got a brand new GPS, programs it, final destination, Colorado Springs, Colorado, and the route will be through Atlanta, 4.5 hours from the Hunter Army Airfield region outside of Savannah to Atlanta. They should be there at midnight. Something bizarre happened at about 112 miles into their journey, and neither the wife nor the husband knew that this occurred, that the GPS took them off on a route that went almost 90 degrees to the north when they are, or northeast, when they were going essentially what would be northwest to Atlanta. And they end up, when they become conscious of anything, it is of a light. And they end up pulling the truck over to the side of a road, not understanding where they are or what's happening, but they're seeing this bright white light, comes down in front of the truck. The Army sergeant estimates, based on all of his experience with looking at things aerial, that it's 820 feet wide, which is about 3 football fields, and that this has come down about 200 feet above the car. He thinks that so if it's 820 feet wide, it's about 200 feet high. He and the wife are both looking at, they see different shapes, as often people do, but something coming around the middle that might have been lights in set windows, but it's right below that midline, that they see 5 dark symbols. And everything about the timeline seems jumbled. And where they stopped and pulled over, they had just gone through thick fog, and there was no reason for there to be thick fog. It was a clear, beautiful night. There was no rain, but they remember very clearly, both of them.
Okay, so Linda, if I'm getting this correctly from you, this craft, you're thinking, misdirected them, took control of their GPS, and brought them where the craft wanted them to be.
To Wadley, Georgia, which is a really tiny town. And he has only one solid thing that gives a timeline for all of this being in this truck with this huge thing, is it blinks out. It didn't travel. It just blinked out. And he looked at his watch, and his digital watch said 1:29 a.m., which would have been Eastern time. And he thinks, I think we were there for just 5 minutes, Linda, but he said, when it disappeared, my wife and I are completely confused, and I move the car forward, and not very long, we see a gas station, and I pull in, and I try to get out of the truck, and my legs feel like wet noodles. I don't know what is happening or what is wrong. My wife feels disoriented. The kids are asleep in the back, and they get something at this gas station, and then they are still following their GPS in the car. And he said, we are so disoriented that I'm still going toward where it says that the final destination is still ahead of us. And he said, we get in the car blindly and we drive where the GPS then says we've reached the final destination. And it was a cemetery, empty, dark, in Wadley, Georgia, and at this point, his left brain begins to start clicking in. Something is really wrong. Why aren't we in Atlanta? What is wrong? How has this happened? And that's when he turns around, goes back now with sort of a disturbing alarm beginning to enter his consciousness about what in the hell has happened. And they get back on the road. They get to Atlanta 1 hour after sunrise, and they check into a motel. He begins to have nightmares and can't sleep, and they're all upset, the husband and the wife, and they get back on the road again. It's the next night, the night of June 30th, where all of this dovetails into something reminiscent of Jim Peniston at R.A.F. Bentwaters in Rendlesham Forest 36 years before. They drive, and then they try to get some sleep because they are exhausted and beginning to feel sick. And so now they check into a Motel 6. The Motel 6 gives them an 8.5 by 11 type receipt. And why this is relevant. When he went to bed the second night, he's seeing gray beings, nightmares, all sorts of things are coming jumbling into his mind. And as far as he's concerned, he was sleeping seeing these beings. And then it would be just like you open your eyes and you can't believe. You're standing in the motel bathroom. You have the receipt from the Motel 6 in your left hand. You have a ballpoint pen in your right hand. And you are looking at the back of the 8.5 by 11, and here are squares and lines filling the entire back of this receipt. And you have telepathic words that are coming into your mind. And at that moment, he thinks he's gone nuts. He doesn't understand what is happening. And they continue from that point going forward, getting to Colorado Springs, with him having binary code coming into his mind, all sorts of bizarre things, and the grays are becoming more vivid in more and more dreams. Now, when I got in touch with him, he sent me, because I asked, I said, can I have the receipt starting from Hunter Airfield? You said you stopped and you got a bungee cord and some stuff. I would like to make sense, at least on paper, of all the receipts that you've still got from that trip so I can lay it out and try to understand. And in my Earth Files reports, all of these receipts at gas stations and the motel and the hotel and everything I do have and lay out. And you get to my asking him if I could send these squares and ones to 3 different people who have worked with me on binary code and see what they would come up with. And at Earth Files, I have this whole story, and what is so interesting is that I did the same thing with binary code analyzing people on Jim Peniston from December 26, 1980, and I put a comparison in my Earth Files report, and I'm just, because we're compressing time, I'm going to give you the sentences first of what has come out from 3 very skilled binary code translators. They all agree. Here is the first line of the squares and lines in the Army sergeant who found himself becoming conscious in the bathroom, having filled up the back of the receipt. Here's the first line. Continuous protection of humanity, latitude, longitude, 49.27 degrees north, 11 degrees, 5 minutes east. And when I went to Google
I'm sorry, would you repeat that?
Yep. 49.27 north.
Got it.
11.5 east. And I did this in Google Earth and could not believe that I was coming up in Hohenberg, Germany, about 100 miles northeast of Nuremberg. And I was thinking of course, Nuremberg was where the Nazi trials were held, but a friend of mine said, remember, Linda, that woodcut from 1561? It shows what appears to be what's called a UFO battle of different shaped craft in the sky around the sun and a great big black spear down below them. It is called the Hans Blazer woodcut from 1566, and it is a woodcut about an April 14th, 1561 battle over Nuremberg that was published in the Nuremberg Gazette of 1561. And this is what they said, that the morning sky was filled with cylindrical shapes from which emerged black, red, orange, and blue-white spheres that darted about. I'm reading from the Nuremberg Gazette. Between the spheres there were crosses with the color of blood. This frightful spectacle was witnessed by numerous men and women. Afterwards, a black spear-like object appeared, and it goes on saying that prior to this morning of 1561 in April, where there appeared to be a war in the skies, that right before this, get this sentence, the sun and the moon have been darkened on a number of occasions in the preceding weeks and months, which makes no sense, but this is a 1561 report. Well, what if this sentence, continuous protection of humanity, and this puzzling latitude, longitude, which turns out to be Hohenberg, Germany, 100 miles northeast of Nuremberg, means that this is an area of Earth where there have been battles between the friendlies and the unfriendlies, as Lynn Buchanan would say for remote viewing, and that there is something trying to actually protect humanity in a continuous, ongoing way. And now I'm going to go to the next sentences. So we're now with the Georgia Army Sergeant. Expose hidden knowledge to all citizens, and all is all caps in the binary code. Expose hidden knowledge to all citizens. Next sentence, advancement in imperative for planetary survival, and the interpretation is human advancement imperative, that we're too dumb and slow and behind, and we've got to accelerate to survive. Then the next sentence, beware of Orion 1350.3 and the single letter cap Z, and then reticuli is spelled RUTICULI, and followed by 39.1, question mark on the binary, 70. And the geneticist Horace Drew in Sydney, Australia, who did all of this translation that was backed up by the others, added this note. He said, those numbers, 1350.3 and 39.1 with a question mark and 70, they are actually the numbers of the distance in light years from Earth to the Orion Nebula, which is 1,350 light years, and to the binary star system of Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2, which is 39.17 light years. So he made that point. These numbers are not idle. They actually relate to light year distances.
Okay, here's what I...
All right, so at that point, we are, unfortunately, already have run long. We are going to have to leave it there. Come back tomorrow night, and we will have the conclusion of our Belle and Mrs. Linda Moulton Howe. Until then, of course, make sure you do like, share, and subscribe. Get us to those goals of 50,000 views, 1,000 subscribers, so Boxy will send us those red packages, and YouTube will pay attention to us. Until tomorrow, be kind to one another, like, share, and subscribe. And it's always a great new world to release the Krakens. Have a great night, enjoy your rest, and we'll see you tomorrow as we continue to march along here from day one. Have a great night, everybody.